I have an idea.
What's the
They
idea?
can't see you, so you have to
I'm nodding vigorously
verbal
in
acknowledge.
anticipation for this idea.
I was semi-recently asked what I would have done during the Revolutionary War.
I love these questions.
And my answer was nothing. What's your answer?
Oh, I 1,000% would do nothing. I would be the biggest bootlicker in the world.
Wait, bootlicker? Why specifically?
I don't know, man. I'm just like I'm a big believer in status quo. I understand that there are things about status quo that need to be challenged at times, but if the king tells me to give him $50 for tea, I'm gonna do it because I don't know any better.
Yeah, I'd probably just stop drinking tea.
Yeah, like I'd just be like, that sucks. Like I really like tea, but I guess I'll drink tobacco water or whatever it is they drank back then.
Yeah. I think I was just hung up on the idea of going out and killing people. Just wasn't. I'm not super motivated.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only a little bit motivated to do that now.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely based on my admittedly relatively vague understanding of sort of what was motivating people to go to war, other than taxes and like general, we're different, we're pioneer people, you can't govern us, you're like a million miles away. I just wouldn't be excited about it. I'm having a hard time seeing where I'm like super stoked to kill.
I honestly,
people.
From my understanding of that era of combat, it's less about you killing people and more about the terror of seeing the people next to you die. Because you actually have no idea you're killing people most of the time. Because it's just a line of people. You can lie to yourself and say, I always miss. Because you're not watching the dude die. Versus like now,
and stuff. You have to.
I mean, you get
at some point
it is
may
a
have
rare.
to impale somebody.
Bayonets are more about if you're running at when you're running at them, the other dudes freak out and run away. Like the frequency, because I think you're picturing the Patriot a lot more. Where
I
it's
don't
like,
think you can tell
don't
me
want to be Mel
sign
Gibson.
up for the army. I guarantee you'll never be in a close quarters situation.
No, I'm not saying you'll
during this
never be. I'm saying it's
war.
very rare. Because if you get close enough to use a bayonet, the other dudes are like ripping you apart. So like bayonets are really a like overwhelming numbers, we're trying to freak you out, or it's like we're pushing really hard to take a position. But like the likelihood that you get within range to use a bayonet without being dead yourself is pretty low. The odds just aren't
I'm
great.
not signing up, George. I'm sorry. That's not enough of a pitch.
Here's my pitch. The British people suck, and you will probably die before you kill anyone.
Okay, but
if your hang up is murder, you won't get the chance. I promise.
No, they're shooting. You're shooting from the tree. The whole reason that we won, at least in part, is because we fought not in the European style. I know it's not all of it. I just mean, in general, like the warfare was changing at this point. In the 1600s, maybe it was more of that. But even then, most of your fights are against Native Americans who are jumping out of the trees.
Even the Civil War, dude. And I honestly, if I were to take that question and make it a harder one, I would have said what I do in the Civil War. Because that one, I think...
Well, we can get to that.
We'll get there.
I'm talking about wars.
Stick a pin in it.
We're going to pick a war that you do want to fight in.
I mean, here's the thing. I don't want to fight in any wars, but I do often, when thinking about this question, picture our friend Kevin. And I'm like, Kevin's out there doing it.
Kevbot, friend of the podcast.
Friend of the podcast.
Patron.
Yeah. So he's out there doing it, and the dude's a very gentle, cool dude. So I think that there's like there's probably a thing that could be awoken in me to go out there and fight somebody. I don't think
they needed as much HR in that time as they do now. He's
Alexander Hamilton the whole play.
Not to say that he wasn't deployed.
The whole play is him writing letters. So Kevin is write this down, everybody. He is the Lin-Manuel Miranda.
I guess what I'm
US
saying
Army.
is, if you went up to Kevin, if you went up to somebody now and said you're not going to have to stab anybody to death, I would be like, that's probably generally true.
Yeah.
Because our guns are better,
but you also know who you're killing more than you used to, because the guns are better, but you're more likely to hit.
I just don't want to. I don't want to stab anybody. Well, no.
You just don't want to end up in the Saving Private Ryan. The only reason we're talking about
stabbing people is because you were like, it's not that big a deal. Just sign up.
No, I didn't say that. I was saying that I think what you're picturing is less likely in the Revolutionary War.
Devin, I don't want to kill people by any means.
Yeah, no, I understand.
But stabbing is the worst means. In my opinion.
I agree. Nobody signing up for the Saving Private Ryan scene
because it was like yeah. I did actually just watch that because I put it into. Maybe I put it into Twilight. I think I put that clip into something. I just can't remember what the context was.
It's a really good clip, but it also is 1,000% to your point why I would never be able to, I think, willingly sign up for any kind of combat, because I'm just picturing I will end up there eventually. It's not likely, but
okay, all right. So
but
fine.
I don't want
there's one reason to not fight is because you don't want to kill people or get slow stabbed by a Nazi.
Yes,
that's fair.
Very fair.
I guess the questions stemming from that are, A, no other context. Is there any war you would have signed up for? American wars. I don't care about.
Yeah,
that's the only real country.
I mean, here's the thing, dude. I think that it's hard to separate out how I feel about it as a person sitting in a green swivel chair in 2024 from, you know, how I'd feel in 1939 when the Nazis are on the rise. Like, I think that's I think that it's tricky because on one hand, I do think the Revolutionary War was very split. Like, there were very clearly loyalists and, you know, revolutionaries. And so I think there's something unique there because it's like, it was very much an impassioned thing. It was like we believe in an idea.
Revolutionary War?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you had wealthy people, you know, who were like, hey, we don't like paying a lot of taxes and this isn't great for us. Which, you know, ideas are great, but they're divisive in nature versus, you know, 1939. It's like, well, Nazis are killing people and that's bad.
Right.
Like, and everybody could kind of rally behind that. So I think that if I was sitting there, you know, I don't know if I'd be full on Steve Rogers mode, but if, you know, the vast majority of your hometown is signing up to go beat up the Nazis, then I assume I'd probably sign up to go beat up Nazis as well.
So I will say that so I reread Band of Brothers, the book, for the 9th time recently. And it is definitely a thing that in that very small window of time, the conflict felt pure enough ideologically, to your point. There's not a lot of Americans and if they were bad dudes, but they're like being like, I don't know, they seem like maybe they're fine. As opposed to a Vietnam, as opposed to even like the Iraq War or Gulf War, any of these other ones that we sort of have all these nebulous conflicts now. But I think what would be motivating for me actually is I am like inspired by the Easy Company and 101st Airborne specifically because they all became best friends and they were all badasses, you know? Like, you know, it's hard to know how much, you know, things are played up or whatever, but it's really, I think my personality would have gotten, especially in the way that they did it, would have gotten really motivated to just become really kick-ass. And I could see a world in which when I actually had to shoot a Nazi in the face, I would be like, I don't know, I feel uncomfortable killing things. But that's sort of like sports team mentality. Particularly, they had a bad coach, quote unquote.
Miracle on Ice.
Yeah,
scenario.
Miracle, but in World War II.
Miracle on Normandy.
I would be motivated by that and that alone, probably. And the thing about them being Nazis would be just enough for me to not feel repulsed out the gate or whatever in the way that Revolutionary War. And you're right. I mean, I guess Civil War, it's like, I suppose it would feel different if it would be hard to know what to do if I live in Charlottesville like I do now and we're being invaded. And like, I don't know what my mindset is. I'm probably a guy who's been told his whole life that slavery is cool, and they're probably telling me it's slave rights states' rights or something. I would probably
be really conflicted to your point. Like if everybody around me is doing it, Revolutionary War feels a lot more like, I'm sorry, what is your idea? This is a really long document. It's very, very flowery.
Can you point me to the Spark Notes?
Yeah, I'm just, I'm trying to do mercantilism, and I'll grumble about your taxes, but
I mean, but to your point, I think that this is where the propaganda machine matters a lot, because there is a tipping point where the ideological cause becomes way less of a selling point when enough people have died. Where it's like, let's rewind to the less than stellar time of right when we start the war in Iraq, where, Alan Jackson and every country music artist of all time is writing a country ballad about how much, we need to go kick all of the asses in the Middle East and how terrible everything is. And, we're all the pictures of people on carriers and we're starting this war. And there was a humongous uptick in people who were like, yeah, let's go fight people.
Sure.
And that maintained for a couple of years. Like the fervor of that was not like short-lived necessarily.
Right.
But like now we look back on it and is a very unpopular situation, and the U.S. military has like record low recruiting rates and still fighting generally the same amorphous conflict that you were kind of nebulous situation that we kind of started on, but it's just a wildly unpopular situation.
Right.
And so the sweet spot, I think, for conflicts are ideological purity, right? We got a clear good guy, bad guy situation going on. And it's not necessarily just rooted in idea. It's, like the Cold War went forever, but going and fighting Russians, I think, would have become very unpopular very quickly once people started dying, because it's like, well, we're fighting over what we think versus, Nazis murder people and bomb things, and terrorists blow up buildings with good Americans in it, and so we need to fight that immediately. And World War II, I think, really hits the sweet spot of it was short. You have a clear bad guy who's doing bad guy things, and we have clear good guys who are like, hey, we're just trying to stop the bad guys. And by the end of the war, there was definitely fatigue, but I think the fatigue was way more rooted in the severity of the war than it was in people being like, maybe we don't need to fight this war anymore.
Sure.
So, I think that when we kind of look at that, it's there's like, what is war? Like, do we have this warrior culture? Which, no, I would not say I ascribe to. As a country, we do a bit, but like more from our couches than actively going out and fighting things. But yeah, I just think I think certain wars I probably would have signed up for because everybody was signing up for them, and there was a clear this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think the era of those wars is probably passing in a big way with the internet and the complexity of geopolitical situations. Like,
well, it is interesting. I mean, we've got some real ground wars for the first time in a long time. Well, like, and by ground wars, I mean seemingly state on state. Obviously, Ukraine versus Russia. And, the Israel-Gaza thing is less, like, defined like government v. government, but it does feel more like a real war than even the Iraq war or whatever. Which is like, you just like swooped in and we won in 3 days or whatever, quote unquote, but then we're just dealing with counterterrorism forever. It's very different. And I'm not going to comment on it because that'll get us canceled real fast.
That's spicy.
Yeah. And I don't know enough about it, and so I'm not going to pretend that I do. I will say that this sort of spirals off into this. I should have looked up the article ahead of time so that I could point people to it. Maybe I'll do it later. But the idea is there's this article. It's very opposed to what it calls the imperial state of mind, or empire as a state of mind or being. And without getting all the way into it, the idea is a thing that I think is very popular, definitely on the internet, definitely in America. But it's this idea that, and it's also sort of the premise of Urinetown, the play. If you've ever seen that,
I have in high school.
It's great. Basically, the idea being that the only way to make things right is to defeat all the people who disagree. The way that countries do this will be, invading or whatever another country. The whole Cold War is like really the only way to stop the spread of communism is to destroy all the communists or the capitalists, depending on where you landed on that. And however, the problem with that is okay, say, like an example in American politics is more left-leaning people will say, when it comes to immigration, illegal immigration, it'll be like, well, if we just got rid of all the evil border control conservatives, then everything would be great. The opposite, right-leaning version of that is if we got rid of all the pussy liberals, everything would work. When looking at it differently might be, hey, why are Hondurans coming here in the first place?
Yep.
Like, maybe the problem is not that they are. Well, sorry. Well, but maybe the problem is more, why are they? And could we be doing more to fix the actual root issues?
So we need to invade Honduras.
Exactly.
we got to the bottom of this.
And I would sign up tomorrow.
I don't know what imperialism is, but I do think we need to invade Honduras to stop this.
Well, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot to suggest that the American intervention in sort of Central America has not been beneficial to those countries in the long term. It has maybe benefited America. I don't know. I don't really understand. I don't know anything. This is why this is not a political podcast. I more just think it's interesting. See, the problem though is that if you say, I mean, this is a thing that people say a lot, which is like, the government's evil. We need to overthrow it, whether it be voting everybody out or literally shooting everybody, which is the thing that people on my Facebook say. It's like, then you become the empire if you win. And then the only way to maintain that is to continue to stamp out opposition. And you're just as bad. I mean, even if you feel like you're ideologically pure, the fact that you're stamping other people out suggests that maybe you're not.
See Star Wars for reference.
Well, Star Wars doesn't do a good job of that, though. I feel like they win, and then they're just like, but maybe they didn't. I don't know. Like the rebels.
Well, I'm talking about the empire, the start of the actual empire that, imperialism.
Yeah. But I just think it's, we don't ever consider bypassing we defeat all the people who disagree and getting more to like, what actually is the problem and could we fix that problem? Or not, I don't know.
Or hot take, it might not be our problem to fix.
Well, I think the argument against that would be, okay, but Hondurans are coming in and it's creating problems.
Well,
even if it's not literally creating like what is the word I'm looking, like economic problems or whatever. People are mad at each other about it. Yeah. So it's our problem in the sense that people are going to make it their problem.
Yeah. Well, yes, and I think that
you could say it's not necessarily our government's problem. Like maybe it could be Americans going in peacefully, independently. Or other countries, or whatever.
Yeah.
Nonprofits.
Well, I mean, I think it's just when you look at it, it's, what's our problem? It kind of brings up the, if you're a hammer, every problem's a nail, right? Where when I say it's not our problem, it's not our problem to necessarily, like, heavy-handedly fix.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's America's go-to move, is typically strong arming, kind of pushing for things, leveraging resources in a strong way.
Yeah.
Where I think that we can be vested in an outcome. We can care. I think it would be silly to say that like countries wouldn't have interests in a lot of these conflicts.
Yeah.
But also part of what creates future conflicts is people who are not kind of active participants in what's going on are tipping scales and putting people situations at play that realistically never would have been there. Yeah. I mean, when you look at the Middle East, like a lot of it is kind of Western countries drew these very kind of arbitrary boundaries because they were like, okay, well, you know, there's resources here that we have an interest in, and so we're going to put the people we want in charge of these kind of very arbitrarily drawn situations. And so now we're kind of stuck in this, well, we've made a huge mess. And what do you do to navigate that mess? Like, you know, is it our responsibility to help clean it up now that we broke it? Is it we acknowledge we did something wrong and we step out? Like, I don't, again, I am not a political analyst either.
I suppose maybe even more what I would want to get at is I don't know how to fix anything. I do think, though, that this mindset that the problem is always a different type of person or people group, that if we just got them out of the way. Like, another way that you could look at it is, back to the Honduras thing, it's not about, like, even if people believe that they could fix the immigration problem in a nice way, it feels like most people would believe that the impediment is the other ideologically opposed people first. It's like, we have to destroy all liberals and then we can go help Honduras or conquer it.
Yeah.
Or we have to destroy all the conservatives and then we can finally give aid to whatever. But I think but even beyond that, like, specific issue or the Middle East or whatever, it feels like interpersonally this is just sort of a thing that's constantly going on. And I find myself in this a lot. And one of the reasons I wanted to, I didn't necessarily, I wasn't thinking I would lump these two together, but obviously we have. But it's kind of like, you know, this is for patrons only, right? I don't know if anybody will care about this. Basic gist is, obviously it's no secret that the way that Cracked and I ended was not my favorite. And I started doing this course about sponsorships, which is just like how to get better sponsors and stuff like that. But one of the first things they ask you to do is an exercise of like, why are you even making videos and doing things in the first place? And I started thinking about it, and I was like, actually, the only reason that I'm doing any of this, it began because I wanted to work for Cracked, right? Like, the first website I wrote for was Cracked. And then that just made me write for more websites, whatever, to build up my resume to hopefully get hired by Cracked, which I did. But now I don't work for Cracked. And so it's like, oh, right. So what does that mean? Like, what am I doing? And I'm realizing that too quickly my gut feeling is, oh, now I want to defeat Cracked. Or I want to watch them die, or whatever.
Not die.
Not die.
The company.
No.
He wants to see them suffer financially.
But even still, it's like, I don't even care. Like, I don't have any problems with, like, any of the people, really. I just sort of, but I feel this, like, I constantly feel the struggle of, like, you know, if every CEO jumped off a cliff, then the world would return to harmony and perfection. And, like, I want to defeat all big conglomerate media, whatever.
Buds wouldn't allow for that.
And I might not be wrong in a general sense. I don't know what the problem is exactly that needs to be fixed. However, I do think it's not actually a valuable or useful way to look at life. I don't want to make things to defeat other things. Or, you know, I think Cracked could be a profitable, useful company and people could work there, and that would be great. I don't know why I feel like in every issue that I have, it often feels like, well, I just need to get these people out of the way or like defeat them or whatever. Even if it's not as straightforward as that, I feel so, it's like we're just drawn to this conflict of others for whatever reason. And it's not even like I don't have a little bit of like angst towards them. But at the same time, who cares? And it's kind of like,
you know,
it's like the Mad Men meme.
Yeah,
I'm probably gonna run into them in the elevator and be like, I've been wanting to stab you every day, and they're like, I don't think about you at all. And we're like, no.
He doesn't want to stab them.
I don't want to stab anyone.
Yeah, and I think that when we kind of look at this, both from the, what you described with Cracked and what we're kind of looking at in the way of war and, just kind of conflict in general, I do think that all of these things at their core are kind of rooted in this kind of like self-preservation thing that's wired in all of us, right? Like us versus them, this kind of tribal thing that we have going on is kind of just, I think it's just a really important part of what we are and who we are. And sure. When things are good and we don't really have anyone to be mad at, we come up with random things to be mad at, right? It's, we find arbitrary distinctions all over the place that we need to be able to separate someone out because I think there's just a part of us where if something's not going right, it's somebody's fault somewhere. And if things are going right, then we just watch sports and yell at the Bears and the Packers because fuck those guys.
Whoa.
I'm sorry. Is this not a Patreon exclusive?
I don't know. We may make this public someday.
Well, FTP, F the Packers. So, but the point is, I think that there's just kind of this thing that's inherent in people to feel threatened by and to want to fight, right? Sometimes physically, sometimes it's I just want to see them lose. I'd feel better if they lost kind of piece of us.
So I think, and I think what's interesting though is even as we were talking about war stuff, we're talking about like which is the most which is the cleanest break between us versus them. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be like some Nazis were fine, but it does sort of feel like even with World War II, a lot of the problems the way that we handled the end of World War I, where we were overly punitive, and then it made Germans be like, you know what, who sucks? The whole world, and we're gonna kill all of them. Which is also a bad way to handle that situation. Yep. But I don't know. It's just, I was going to say, I mean, obviously you're a counselor, so you see this more often than I do. But one of the things that Anna and I, my wife, talk about a lot is just like, it's so easy to think my wife is like opposed to me or like is thwarting me or like against me. And constantly having to remind each other, like, we're on the same team. Yep. Like, if you lose, I lose. There's no winning an argument in the sense, not because it's like they always say that. I feel like in weddings they're always like, you're never gonna win another argument because happy wife, happy life. And I don't mean that. I mean, happy wife, boo. No, it's like the your life doesn't improve by winning an argument at the expense of another person's like happiness or well-being, like smashing them in the process. And it's not even, anyway, just you're on the same team. And I used to say this ironically with Cracked a lot when I would meet with, say, College Humor guys, now Dropout, and be like, we're all on the same team now. We're just fighting the algorithm or whatever. Like, there's no, if College Humor figures out a way to make money, that only helps us. It doesn't hurt us. I'm not like, we've defeated an opponent and now have, more of a market share. I guess that is how business literally works, but it doesn't have to.
I read no, that's a weird segue that I don't need to take. But to your point,
sign up for the Patreon for Devin's weird segue.
I'm so sorry.
Bonus episode.
I'm actually not gonna take the segue, and no one's gonna know what I was thinking.
Oh my god,
that's a little something for me. But the way that our brains are wired, and I actually like that you brought up the thing with it's easy for us to be like, this person's against me. Like, my spouse is actively thwarting me. Yeah. The way that our brains are made is that we actually, for all of the amazingness of the human brain, it is actually terrible at navigating complex ideas. Like, and particularly gifted people, like really intelligent people, are able to do that. But like, our brains crave more than anything black and white. Yeah. They just want simple things. And like 90% of what our brain is doing through the day is it's like on autopilot because it's spent so much of our kind of earlier years developing these just very black and white, they're called schemas, right? But they're just categories for things. You just see it and you know what it is, right? And so what our brain is actively doing is it's forcing things into schemas. It needs to do it. Its primary job is to make our lives simple so that we don't have to think and feel stressed or worried about things. And sometimes that's very easy, right? We see snakes and we go, snake bad, right? Even if it's a perfectly harmless snake, it's just, if it's not a bad snake, then whatever, like no skin off our nose. And if it was a bad snake, then we're safe and great. And so we're just constantly doing this day in, day out. And then we run into really complex situations like other people who have competing needs sometimes, or who have different opinions that are equally valid. And our brain is sitting there kind of turning its wheels and is like, is this a good guy or a bad guy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, is this friend or foe? Do I need to thwart, defeat, fight this person, or do I support them, and is their interest aligned with mine? And that's, I do couples counseling, and that's like 90% of what I do with people is like have them sit down and be like, do you actually see this person as being on your team, right? Yeah. Like, I call them caricatures, right? Like, think about the people on the boardwalk. We were drawing those pictures with the super kind of animated features, and it's like this idea that like what our schemas do is they kind of force us over time to view these people in these really kind of over the top ways, right? It's like, instead of being like, this person had a moment where they were more interested in their, what they wanted than mine, right? It was a moment in time. It was, well, this is a selfish person, right? And we, and what we're kind of doing in couples counseling is challenging that and going like, actually, it takes a little bit of integrative complexity here, right? Like, there's lots of things at play, and we need to be able to see them as a whole person, and ideally see that whole person as good, right? Like, that they want to help you, that they care about you, that they are actually going to sacrifice for you if it came to that place.
Yeah.
And when we go back to this idea of conflict on a larger scale, like, all of that stuff is at play, right? When we look at politics, it's, do we view conservatives or liberals as generally good Americans who care, who might have some different ideas and might make mistakes in how they word things or do things, or are they, trying to destroy our country? Do we see people in the Middle East or Honduras or wherever, right, as people, right, who are complex, who do some things well and some things poorly, who view the world differently, who have different ideas, and that idea isn't inherently threatening to us, or are they just bad?
Yeah. When it gets cyclical too, right? Like, the more that, just to make it more political, the more that somebody says this ideology is opposed to, like, anyone who ascribes to this is opposed to me and needs to be eliminated, probably makes them more likely to say anybody who doesn't needs to whatever. And they're like, see, they're saying it. Even more we need to eliminate. Mm-hmm. And then it just kind of spirals into...
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think it's the same thing relationally, and the same thing just kind of in general, getting a Middle Easterner who's not a big fan of America, and then you blow up their house. It's like, well, they're not going to be more of a fan now. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to be like, why are all these people trying to blow us up? We should blow them up first. And you're like, but that's how you get blown up.
Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, I totally get why they would, right? Like, right. If that's the mechanism that the world operates under, then it's like, if, like, going back to the couples counseling example, right? After enough time, you're right? Like, the other person is against you because you've treated them crappily for a while, and they no longer see you as someone who cares about them. And the mechanism for getting even or getting what you need is to actively harm the other person. Mm-hmm. And so, like, it's not like this totally outlandish idea that they are actively at a point trying to hurt you, because they do. What we kind of need to be able to do is go, okay, we have to make the first step to stop it, right? Yeah. Like, there was a wrong that we're not going to meet with another wrong. And we're going to actively go, okay, you know what? That was kind of a shitty thing to do, but I'm not going to return in kind. Like, I'm going to actively care for you, take a step towards you, try to repair. and we kind of have to go through this process of recognizing that to be able to see things as more complex and to be able to have room for different people believing different things, acting in different ways, is that like we also just have to be okay with being heard.
Right. It is. I wouldn't suggest that any of this stuff is easy, obviously, or even intuitive in any way, or like natural. That's why I'm constantly having to remind my wife and I are constantly having to remind each other that we're on the same team. I was going to say one other way that makes it difficult that I just thought of is, I had to read this leadership book.
Gross.
About, I think it was called like Inside the Box or Outside the Box or something. I don't remember, but it's not about creativity. It's about this idea that we have this sort of natural, we want to be right all the time. And so one of the things, I'm not going to explain the mechanics of it well, but basically this woman had a son. She's having a lot of conflict with him. He says, "Can I borrow the keys to the car? I want to go out." He's like 16 or whatever. She's like, "Okay, but you got to be back by 10. He leaves. For the next 3 hours, she and her husband are like, that piece of shit, he's not going to be back by 10. He sucks. He's not good at anything. Whatever. He gets back by 10. And now they have to internally justify that they've been shitting on their son for 3 hours. And so they have to be like, well, it's like 10:01, you garbage person. And then he's like, what the hell? I actually did what they wanted. What was even the point? They hate me anyway. Mm-hmm. And so now you've both, rather than encouraging the positive step, you've had to, because that would require you to be like, oh, I'm an asshole. I've been an asshole for the last 3 hours. You have to say, no, what I did was justified. They suck. And then they're like, even when I try, they are mean to me. So next time I am going to come back at 11 and I'm going to, smash tomatoes all over the back seat.
Yeah. That's what I always did.
Yeah. And so it's just tough. It's your self-preservation thing is correct. I think it's just tough to be willing to open yourself up to any sort of loss at any level ever.
And this is the thing where I think like understanding how brains work is a really important part of this, because if we can view it not so much as it's a character flaw, right? That it's hard to self-evaluate, but instead view it as our brains are wired to do certain things, and that it's a biological process that we kind of just push back on, right? Yeah. There's lots of things that we do biologically that aren't great for us, right? That's part of the reason why people sit on the couch all day and eat potato chips, because like our bodies are designed to be like, oh, this is like, we conserve energy and consume food, right? So like there's a part of it where we can kind of destigmatize the conversation a bit by being like, okay, everyone kind of is doing this in some capacity, right? And if we're particularly struggling with it, it's not because we're necessarily an a-hole, right? It's that our brains are trying to do something, and if we don't check it, right, if we see that it's happening and do nothing about it, then we're an a-hole, right? But like when some of these things just kind of happen over time, being able to kind of say like, okay, like my brain is trying to create a schema here, and the schema is that my kid is a turd, and something happened that challenged that. Am I going to choose to actually sit down and like do the heavy lifting required to challenge my worldview or my perspective, or am I going to just go, well, you're 1 minute late, or oh, you were late one time before this, and I'm gonna, that's what I'm gonna hold on to.
Right.
I think that there's just something really kind of beneficial in being able to kind of depersonalize it a bit and just be like, we're looking at data, right? Like, if you only have two data sets, and one is this person get home at 10 and the other one is the person got home at midnight, you just don't have enough data to draw a conclusion, right? Or if they came home, at 10 a bunch of times and came home at 11, throw out the at 11, right? They were late once, right? Yeah. And I just think that, as we're kind of striving towards being able to see people as whole people, or situations as complex things that have probably complex solutions, right? It's a really important step in it, right? Because we're, when we look at terrorism, I'm not excusing any act of terrorism, but like, some are fine. If you spend 15 years kind of bombing a region of the world, some anti-American sentiment should be expected, right? And so if we decide as a country to be like, actually, we're going to do this differently, right? We're not going to be as invasive. We're going to step out of the political realm in those areas, right? And there's still some strong anti-American sentiment and acts of terror or whatever it might be associated with that, right? There's kind of this piece of us that like, we need to kind of find a complex response that's not just smash it, because that's feeding into it again. And it's the same thing in relationships, the same thing politically. So, when we're talking about war, to your point with the World War I and the Nazis, right? I actually totally, if I were in Germany, to flip it around, right? If I were in Germany, I could probably see myself signing up, just because my life was super crappy for 20 years. And there was a pretty clear bad guy in that situation, which was all of the people who made us sign an agreement to live kind of crappily.
Right.
And, that's not to in any way excuse the choices of people who end up in those positions, but I can see why it would start as a very black and white thing to a lot of people on both sides.
Well, and it's like, the problem in that is at no point, it feels like in most situations, nobody is ever choosing to break out of that cycle. So like, and another example from that book was, guy wakes up in the middle of the night, his son's crying. It's like, 1 or 6 months or something. And his immediate thought is, my wife is fake sleeping. Doesn't she know that I work? All this stuff. And then he goes, she's probably I should just assume that she's asleep. He goes, he takes care of his son. He comes back. She's so grateful. She wakes up then. And it improves their relationship in a way that he's already awake. Like the problem is, the like waking up tomorrow morning is already a problem. But the way that he chooses to do that, actively chooses, even if he's wrong and she is faking it, there could be some series of complex reasons, or maybe she's selfish in that moment. Whatever. That doesn't mean that you throw out the whole she's a garbage person.
Yeah.
You kind of just have to choose to start breaking that cycle, though it's difficult and you get hurt and it doesn't work that often in the way that you want. But yeah, I feel like that's just the problem is it's hard because even if you're in a really bad cycle, like say your country's becoming Nazis or whatever, you can't just choose the high ground like one time. To your point about like bombs, you would have to choose it over and over and over until that person or country or whatever can see that as like there's a pattern over time. And to your point, that the schema sort of has to change because it's kind of like there was this black guy who like went and met with his KKK neighbor every day for like 30 years or whatever, and then eventually the guy gave up on the KKK. But it wasn't like he went once and the guy was mean to him and then he was like, never mind, this guy sucks. You just have to keep doing it, which is like basically impossible. So that's why I would probably just go and fight in a war so that I could feel badass. And
that's the thing, right? It's simple. It's simple to be like, I want to be a badass, or like these are Nazis, they're bad. And
I wouldn't in the Revolutionary War because
because it was too complex. It was not an ideological.
Yeah, I was like, I don't get it. I'll just drink coffee. Yeah, well, that went a lot of places.
That did go a lot of places, but I think that to sum up everything Jordan said, I think he's just not that hard on the Nazis. I think he feels he's pretty soft.
You're the one who said if you were in Germany right now, you would be a Nazi.
I mean, here's the thing. If you were to present it like one of these people has taken you from poverty to you can eat. But they have some, they have some ideas that you don't agree with. And then the other people actively are trying to destroy your existence from how it's framed to you, right? I can see why people make compromises if it's like, my family might not eat, right? Or even if it's not just like you're providing a little security, but like you're actually kind of feeding into this other part of us, which is like we want to be better than other people. And so if you're lifting people from poverty to not just poverty, but like we're kicking some butt, like there are people who would certainly be tempted to make some compromises.
Well, and it's not even that basic. I mean, like, so zone of interest. One of the things that's interesting about that is, you know, the primary, the dad, the main guy. It's not that his family's starving. It's not that they're having a hard time. He seems to be motivated by, I want to be praised and competent in general. And it turns out he has a real knack for like designing like gas chambers and stuff. Mm-hmm. There's a scene, he gets sort of promoted or whatever, and he calls his wife because they're separate. And he's like, oh my God, like they're going to promote me or whatever. And she's like, well, how was the party? And he's like, I couldn't even pay attention because I was at the ballroom and I was like looking down on all the people and I was trying to think of how I would be able to gas them all. Germans, like nothing weird. He's just like, this is like what I'm good at. And it's like what I'm thinking about all the time. It's like me thinking about my YouTube channel or whatever. It's just like people will pick. It's not even, I guess what I'm trying to say is that people's motivations won't even be as pure as like, well, I'm hungry and they give me food. It could just, you just move up the hierarchy of needs or whatever. And whoever is fulfilling it,
yep,
you'll take it. A lot of people will take it, and it's really, really tough to not just be like, you know, like one of my major ideological conflicts is I just wish Cracked wasn't doing well so that I would feel better about myself somehow. Mm-hmm. I don't even know how I would feel better other than look at how good I am at making dick jokes comparatively. Mm-hmm. But that is such a that's one of those conflicts that none of those words appear in the Bible, you know?
Yeah.
You're like going up to Moses, I got a real issue. The media conglomerate that bought the website I love, I finally got to work for them. That's all I ever wanted, and it just wasn't what I hoped. And so I've left, and now I'm doing my own thing, and you know, I feel really conflicted about. I don't want them to succeed anymore. And he beats me with a stone tablet.
He's like, I got a good one for you right here. Get out of here.
Anyway, so that's it. We got to leave the pod.